Well, what a pleasure to have you on the podcast, Alistair. How are you?
Yeah, very well, thank you. Just training hard in the middle of, well, actually, hopefully we're coming out of British winter now. Normally I spend a bit more time away, but haven't been able to do that this year. So, yeah, looking forward to some better weather and some easier training.
And how's the training been going? What have you been able to do? Have you been able to do everything or limited?
Training's been pretty good actually, fairly consistent so far this winter. Yeah, I kind of raced quite a lot up into almost right up to Christmas and enjoyed doing that. And then I've been home and just training away and yeah, training normally. I guess normally I would be spend a bit more time in Spain in the winter, and that does allow you to do slightly more intense stuff and have a slightly different kind of training program. But the kind of bones of my training, 80-90% of the week is really quite similar. It's irrelevant almost of the time of year anyway, and also with the fact that the racing season's still quite late. It's looking like best case scenario early May for a bit of racing. So yeah, with that case, yeah, I've just been taking it a bit slower, I guess, building the training up and yeah, feeling quite good.
So that sounds like you're coping with the winter weather and the high winds this week, particularly, as opposed to training camps. You don't have a special dispensation for being able to travel to be able to do that at the moment, then.
Yeah, well, I definitely could travel, and I travelled a lot before Christmas. I ended up going to races in Germany. I raced in Sardinia, raced in Spain, raced in Florida. So spent a bit of time in the US, and was lucky enough to get the dispensation to travel and travel back okay. And yeah, that was all great. We just kind of took the decision earlier this year. Well, kind of in January, we thought, well, maybe we'll go to Spain in February, and then as the situation got a bit worse, our kind of being we were kind of worried about being stuck abroad, and we think it's kind of all right being stuck in Spain for a few weeks, but we didn't want to be there for potentially months. So we decided actually no, let's stay at home where we've got we've got a great setup. It's not like I'm not moaning about it. A great setup of training, and obviously the support system around us in terms of physio when you need it. Got the gym coach, got the massage, got medical support, and all those kind of things. So yeah, which is obviously a little bit harder abroad.
All right, that's interesting in that sense of just judging the risks and the benefits of each one, really, in that sense of thinking, well, if something does go wrong, you perhaps haven't quite got the same knowns that you might have at base where you have got everything within touching distance. Was that part of the decision making?
Yeah, that was definitely part of the decision making. There's definitely times in the year in the lead up to races or whatever where that the seesaw kind of angles more towards the risk side. And if you're training for something specific, if you want to, for me to train at altitude, or if you want to train for something specifically in the heat, obviously the risk reward tilts towards traveling. But yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for, especially kind of in the winter of playing it safe. And yeah, and that goes as well for you, the kind of, as you said, the backup system around you, but also, also the training as well, being 5% under rather than 5% over. That said, I must admit most places actually I've been in the world, when I've had to find some kind of support, you normally can find pretty good support quite quickly, and it's quite amazing. The people out there who are fantastic at what they do all over the place.
That's an interesting phrase, 5% under rather than 5% over. And I remember this time last year and thinking about that kind of idea and prospect for going for the Olympics. And so many people would have been just taking the edge off their training. Just from the point of view of, I don't want to suppress the immune system when I probably need one. Has that been part of your thinking about kind of just your health as much as anything?
I must admit, it hasn't really been part of my thinking in terms of health. Yeah, I personally was never massively worried about coronavirus for me. Young, healthy, relatively young, and I kind of quickly grasped and looked at the statistics around it and realised that that really wasn't that much of a risk to me. But yeah, so in terms of my immune system, no, I wasn't worried about that. I guess the 5% under thing, the nearer you get to 100%, your injury risk is not increasing, probably not increasing exponentially, but somewhere in between. It's significantly increasing the closer you get to that. So that for me, that's kind of high risk reward strategy, and you don't want to do that too often.
Is that something you've learned, Alistair? Is that in terms of the sort of wisdom of the 30 plus career stage, where you've got to be, you've learned the lessons of injury and illness over the years? Is that something you've had to learn, or have you always had that sense of I need to be careful because just in case?
Yeah, I'd love to say that I had learned it categorically, because I haven't. I still get it wrong. I think there is, if we're talking about that line, and I think as an endurance athlete, quite a lot of the time you are probably playing with that line, and I very much remember having conversations as a 20-year-old, and people saying, oh, you train really hard, you train far too much. You won't have a very long career. And I at the time, I thought, well, firstly, I'd much prefer to be fantastic for 2 years and crash and burn. And then obviously as a 21-year-old, you never believe that's going to happen anyway. So, I think I wouldn't say I've learned, I'd say my perspective may have changed a little bit on that. I just tend to try and pick times now, I guess, when I'm trying to push the boat out, as it were, and get to those really kind of top hard training levels. And it's actually not all that frequent.
Right. Okay. That's interesting. So that very phrase of I've sort of learned, it's sort of alluding to your I've got my phases or of intensity. Can I ask you a cheeky question? This is partly inspired by your Twitter profile image. And it's a bit of an indulging question in that I'm curious to verify whether a story about you is true that I've heard from a good source, and that's why I want to check. So the word was that junior race, I don't know where, and I tried to chase it this week, but I couldn't couldn't get a reply. When you were pushing yourself hard and you started to look a bit peaky, and rather than, as perhaps most people would, stop and throw up at the side, you vomited without breaking stride. Is that true, or is that an urban myth?
I don't know. I must admit, there's a few these myths around. I thought you were going to say there's some story that came from somewhere that said I stopped to save a sheep at one point in the middle of a race, and I can't remember that one either. But yeah, I do actually remember being really quite young in cross country races or something, and having this thing where I'd dry vomit kind of towards the back end of a race, and it happening a handful of times. And one of those things, I think when you're a young athlete, you're right, why has that happened? Better not eat chocolate bar half an hour before my race, or whatever I was doing. I can't really remember. But yeah, I mean, I guess to give a bit of context to that, from being 10 to 18, I was probably doing some kind of competitive event, whether that was triathlon, swimming events, cycling events, running, cross country, almost every single weekend. So there's kind of a lot there.
There's quite a few. It was more interesting, less about the nutrition that might have caused it, more the fact that it didn't interrupt your focus on getting to the finish line.
Yeah, I think I've always been kind of very focused in competition, and very, very determined. And I think, to be honest with you, that's something that looking back on it probably came very naturally to me, that the ability to really zone in on what I'm doing, and trying to, I always saw it as forcing every single bit of energy, every possible bit of focus I've got, every nerve and sinew and bit of muscle to propelling me forward, and trying to wipe everything out, and trying to kind of really hone that mentally and physically. And that's a really good thing, but it's also a bad thing because you can really kind of push too far with it. But yeah, I think that's something that thankfully hasn't always has come kind of naturally to me.
And when were you first aware of that you were quite a rare breed in that way? I mean, do you sort of looking around on some of these races and just thinking, I'm giving double here, and that's getting me ahead, or that's giving me results? Were you aware of your competitive drive quite early?
No, I don't think I was actually. I remember kind of going through my early teens and just in kind of enjoying sport and being really determined to do well. So yeah, being at the swimming club, I'd be the one that tried the hardest, even though if I wasn't the fastest. And starting to run and be like, right, the more running I do, the better I'll get, and the better I'll do, and kind of being really determined. But that not really playing out in results as such. So I never really thought anything of it, right up to literally I was kind of 18, 19. Sport was just something I did along with lots of other things that I did. Something that I was really determined to do well at, but I was determined to do well, I guess, at my schoolwork as well and in other things. So, and it was just another kind of facet of my life. Yeah, I'm not sure if it is that much of a actual special attribute. I think most of the people I'm racing are pretty good at pushing themselves when they need to. Otherwise, you kind of wouldn't get there. You're racing guys who are also, they also won their local cross country race because they were better at pushing themselves than all the other 12-year-olds. So yeah, and you rise up. And yeah, I think the thing maybe, and it's really difficult to say because it's one of those things that you actually don't know how other people function. You can't really compare yourselves to other people when you don't really know how hard they're pushing themselves, and it's a moving target. But yeah, I think for me, maybe how it comes easily. I can be really tired and dive in a swimming pool tired on a cold morning, and start racing Johnny or someone else next to me, and that's it. I'll push myself.
Do you know? Have you got a sense of where this has come from? This intensity, this focus, this diligence.
Yeah, no idea at all. It's so easy to fall into the cliche and the book that the kind of book as I was working on the book, that the cliche of super intensity to make up for something or escape from something or make yourself a better existence. I had the most comfortable, happy upbringing possible, from a really good kind of loving family, with a mum that told me every week not to do sport if it made me worry too much and stress me out. But yeah, so none of those normal cliche boxes to be ticked. I think it's just always been a kind of inner drive, and I think actually that's a strength. It's not something I've had to do, or it's something that I've really, really wanted to do. And actually, I think that's a strength in itself.
Oh, right. So the research, such as the one that's springing to mind, is this one that's been thrown around in the press about that there's a disproportionately high level of super elite champions that have experienced some sort of childhood upset or trauma, all these sorts of things that perhaps that is causing them to then create success or drive through sport. So you can't cling to any of that. It's just been there, a contented drive by the sounds of it.
Well, I actually read that bit of research. It was done by the people at psychologists at Bangor, and it's done by UK Sport. Well, like so many other things in science and sport, it makes really nice logical sense that you kind of find sport at a time when you're at low confidence due to a major life event, and you ride the wave out of that by increasing confidence in sport. That's a really kind of alluring thought, isn't it? And I see why people would jump to that or come to that conclusion. But yeah, it definitely wasn't the case for me.
I can see why it might cause it for some, but as you've identified, it you didn't have the cause, but you had it anyway. So does that spill over to other aspects of your preparation and performance? That drive, that industry, wanting to do things well. Does that apply to both your training, but also your recovery too? Are you meticulous in that approach?
Yeah, again, I think it's variable. I'm definitely not meticulous all the time, and I try to have relative on-off switches, and I can be super intense at times, and a lot less intense at other times. And I like to think when I need to be, I can be focused across everything. And yeah, recovery is definitely one of those things. One of the things definitely as I've got older, I've focused a lot more on, and has become a lot more important. But yeah, I guess a lot of the other things around, around sport for me. So in triathlon, making sure I've got the best equipment, and making sure I know the course, and making sure I know about aerodynamics, and making sure I've the best prepared I can be in terms of looking at altitude and heat. Working out protocols for myself of how that works and what that looks like and what's the best way to do it. So I guess to that extent, yeah, I kind of take a relative amount intensity. I don't always know actually intensity is the right word. I mean, definitely at points, but yeah, a bit like people often ask what motivates you to do X, Y, and Z. And I use the anecdote, loads of things motivate me. If I go swimming in the morning, I get up because it's what I do. It's habitual. I then walk downstairs because I'm looking forward to having a cup of tea. I get in the car because I'm looking forward to turning the heated seat on. I walk in the pool because I'm looking forward to seeing my friends. I dive in the pool because I have to motivate myself to go training. And I start pushing myself because I'm competitive and I'm racing someone. So whatever you've got there, you've got half a dozen forms of motivation. And I think it's kind of similar. It's not always I'm doing this because it comes from a part of your mindset that's obsessional. I think, technically I enjoy it. I enjoy most of my training. I enjoy pushing myself. I don't always enjoy it, and I'm having to go out in wet and cold, windy days and do it. But in the same way, I really enjoy looking into and learning how I can maximize recovery, and looking at that by learning about HRV, or how I can maximize race nutrition with various combinations of multidextrose and fructose and glucose, or how I can ultimately produce the best possible heat acclimation protocol for me by reading all the science and having a go at it myself. And yeah, that a lot of those are, I guess, labors of love and interest. And when they wane, a bit of obsession takes over.
Yeah, that's interesting in the sense that I suppose the origin of the question was that the idea that perhaps sometimes it's difficult for athletes to switch off because they're thinking about the next set or the next session, and that can come from a source of worry. I'm trying to cover off a lot of the risks that I'm facing, or I'm competing with athletes even though they're not there. And so if I'm not doing it, they're probably doing it. And that spectrum that I often see for athletes, where some are quite wound up actually and have to have a way of switching off, and others are a little bit I suppose I'd do it, and quite chilled out about it and follow a routine. What it sounds as though you're describing is coming at this from a point of curiosity. I'm interested. I'm into this. This is cool, and it's fun.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is a genuine coming at it from a position of curiosity. I am very, very curious, interested in everything. But yeah, and I think from a training point of view as well, a lot of my training in my early years was done. So I'd actually ride to school in the morning on the canal, which is like a million times better than getting on a crappy school bus. I was cycling on a canal, seeing kingfishers and meeting people I met every day for a chat, when otherwise I would have been in a school bus. And I did a lot of my running in the lunch hour at school, when I'd get down to the changing rooms, put my trainers on and kit on and go out running. and it was almost escapism. And so I think I don't know chicken and the egg, but I don't quite know what came first. But that definitely helped this kind of sense of training as being fun and enjoyable. And then I think the inquisitive thing is just kind of natural as well.
Wow. And we should mention, you mentioned the book, Relentless: Secrets of the Sporting Elite. I'm looking at Amazon now, 8th of July. So you've been hatching this plan for a while, talking to some great performers, some great athletes, people who've been at the top, and that probably links to what you just said about curious. I'm interested to know. Often you'd expect people just to write their autobiography and that'd be done, but you've done it. You've put something together that is actually embracing what you've experienced and almost checking it with other people too.
I think it probably started in 2012. I did something called Superstars, which I was useless at it. But if you don't know what it is, like
I watched that. I watched it.
Events, and I was particularly terrible at the gym test. But the really interesting bit was actually just talking to other athletes, and many of them that I've actually stayed really good friends with, and realizing actually there's some incredible similarities and obviously some massive differences. So, one obvious example, a guy that won a gold medal in double trap shotgun shooting, Peter Wilson, who I stayed really good friends with. He talked about how he'd kind of had a really focused 6 or 8 weeks of training out in the Middle East, where he was aiming to shoot, I can't remember the numbers, but tens of thousands of cartridges effectively. And I was like, yeah, a lot of my training really is based around the ability to do a really focused kind of 6 weeks. And that's what kind of makes it. And just kind of, that's just one example, but interesting, really super interesting similarities and big differences. Anyway, fast forward, and I kind of had this idea and the opportunity to write this book, and really enjoyed doing so.
I can't wait to read it. It sounds absolutely fascinating. But I think there's something to be said there. Just that very sense of saying, you've experienced a similar sort of thing, or I've got a match. There's a similarity. It's not a copy and paste because you're not a competitor, or you're not doing the same sort of training as I am, but we're going through a similar sort of experience. Given that you are elite, you're at the fine end of the normal distribution curve. There are going to be very few people that are actually going to be doing what you're doing, and so to compare with similar levels of elite is quite a fascinating process, really.
Yeah, it was really interesting, and I got the opportunity to talk to some people who I probably wouldn't have talked to otherwise. In snooker, Ronnie O'Sullivan, absolutely, he's a massive running fan. So all he wanted to do was talk about running and running training, and all I wanted to do is talk about the mentality of what it's like when you're lining up a shot, and everything's on that one shot. And for me, I can always say I stand on the start line, and if something goes wrong, I've got basically 2 hours to sort it out. If you mess that up in that moment, there's no coming back. And similarly, talking to Alistair Cook, when the team pressure, you got the pressure of the team and the country from that respect on you, and again, you're standing there facing someone who's throwing the ball at you very quickly, and there is no second or third chance. Effectively, how do you cope and deal with that? So, I a lot of those questions that I've as a amateur sports fan as well, I kind of follow and are interested in everything. So it was fantastic to be able to ask those, and at the same time hear more of the stories. I was actually lucky enough to sit down with Ronnie at his mum's house, and she cooked us dinner, and we just sat there, ate dinner, and had a kind of informal chat, a bit of an interview. Saw some of his trophies, etc. I've been lucky enough to do various interviews with other sports people in similar ways, and I'm very, very fortunate for that, and really enjoyed it.
And how did you choose the people that you spoke to? Did you draw up a bit of a dream list of people that you recognised some level of excellence, or was it within your network?
Bit of both, yeah. People that I knew I could access with, people that I was really interested in, and yeah, and people as well. I set out actually wanting to be able to meet people and do things. So there's a legendary Yorkshire cyclist called Beryl Burton who's fascinated me for a long time. I sadly she's passed away, but went cycling with her daughter. Great kind of anecdote to write and talk about in the book. Initially, my plan was to be able to do that, to do things like that with everyone. Unfortunately, life and things got in the way, and schedules. Trying to schedule time with people who are busy when I'm busy and they're more busy than me is very difficult. So it didn't end up all like that, but a lot of it did, and it was a combination of all kinds of things. Some of it was as well, I want to talk about high pressure, and I want to talk about those situations. And so you think about, high pressure situations. I was thinking, well, for me, the first kind of really exciting Olympics were Sydney in 2000. Who's the pressure? So Ian Thorpe, Kathy Freeman, how can I talk around that? And then link that quite nicely into someone I know relatively well in Adam Peaty, who's kind of got that coming in this year. So I tried to link things together out of interest, and see where that took me.
Wow, brilliant! I can't wait to read it. All right, I need to ask you about sub-7. So, an Ironman in under 7 hours. You said you're ferociously competitive. So, where did this idea come from?
The sub-7. It was actually my idea originally. That we were a few of us kind of sat round a table not long after the Kipchoge 159 attempt, and just thinking actually what could put triathlon on the map, kind of ignite public interest, be inspirational. And one of the things I was really keen of is telling the story of everything that goes into one of these, because actually in lots of ways, Ironman, there's a lot more technical stuff to get right. And you have to have a really good team around you to get that technical stuff right. One of the things I had to learn actually quite quick was it's more significant than Olympic distance, where you potentially have that support network around you. Ironman's kind of another level, and you're trying to get that expertise. And I thought, this story is amazing. We're telling the story of how do you make someone swim as fast as possible in terms of the technology of the wetsuit and drafting. That story is really obvious on the bike. And the aerodynamics, pacing strategy, power, how it comes down to everything, physiology, the balance between how much carbs you can get in and how many carbs you're burning per second, to what power you can effectively hold over those 4 hours on the bike, or 3.5 hours when it comes to sub-7. And then similarly on the run, what intensity does that look like for you? And so for me, that was telling a story of technology of equipment, aerodynamics, weather conditions and meteorology, location. Are you better off doing this thing at altitude or not? Is it better being hot, because hot air is hot, humid with low density, which means you're faster, but is obviously going to slow you down physiologically. Really interesting. And telling that story was one of the initial ideas, and then I went away and basically kind of modeled it, and the swim and the run modeling is maybe very slightly better than back of 5-packet modeling, in terms of if you get a draft on the swim, you can find academic papers that'll say it'll save you 15 to 25% in energy savings. That means you can go a bit faster, and with a wetsuit that's a bit thicker, you can go a bit faster. And that's my anecdotal kind of feeling, etc. And on the run, shoes a bit faster, not slowing down for 10 aid stations for 10 seconds. That's saved you 1 minute 40. But the bike, you can model the bike very pretty accurately, and just using simple physics, I built the model that would in terms of inputting what's climate data in air pressure, humidity, and temperature, my drag area, and various other things, modelled my previous performances fairly accurately. So you can calculate that, what you should be able to do, and that's how I went about doing it, and kind of showed technically it's definitely possible. You just need these conditions, and hopefully we're going from there.
Wow. So I didn't quite realise that how much of a scholar you were of actually doing this as well, in terms of the mathematical modelling, the processes behind it. That is curiosity. That is. I think that's another level of involvement. Are you literally architect for this then?
Well, yeah, I'm not definitely not architect in terms of the event. That's all. That's all going to be put on. But yeah, for example, we had we've been chatting about venues. There was one potential venue we talked about a couple of weeks ago, and it basically meant it was a lap, and there was a corner on this lap that was every 4 or 5K. And I was saying, actually, no, I'm pretty confident from modelling, if you can only go around this corner at less than 40 kilometres an hour, and you need to be averaging, we think, 51 to 52 kilometres an hour, that's going to cost you X seconds per lap, and that's going to mean that it's not possible in these terms. So yeah, that's kind of the level of involvement and detail there's been, and I've really enjoyed that. But I think it's something I've learned, in triathlon is a relatively small sport, so all along I've kind of done quite a bit of this kind of stuff myself. But yeah, just kind of interest in it, and this project in particular has kind of really ignited that as well.
And so you are taking a leaf out of the Ineos sub-2 then, in terms of using every possible advantage. And talking to Peter Vint, who was one of the consultants on the Ineos project, and asking him a bit about the kind of critical commentary around lasers and re-tarmacking, the camber of a roundabout and so on. And he was just talking about, well, that might be for some of the people that don't like change, but actually inside it, there was just real joy of innovation. And, what if we could do this? What if we could do that? Or how about this? We thought of that. And how sparky it was, as opposed to just doing the same thing all the time. And you allude there in terms of actually telling that story. Is that part of the project where you're going to be communicating the changes that you're making?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a couple of things to say to that. I think the first one, the initial idea was in my head to be a Netflix type series where you had an episode on, this is what we've done for the swim, this is what we've done for the bike, this is why we've chosen this location, this is why we've chosen this day on this type of, this time of year as particular for weather conditions, pressure conditions, temperature, humidity, wind, etc. That's the initial idea, and hopefully someone's going to be interested enough to actually make it a reality. But yeah, so that I think the other thing that's kind of around just the joy of innovation. I think that's kind of sport in general. I kind of was going to say earlier when you were saying about learning about injuries and where the line is, I think one of the difficult things is you might learn and understand your body of a year or 2 years ago, but it's almost like you've got a new engine, a chassis this year, and you'll have a new one next year. So you are actually constantly innovating in various ways, especially if you want to have a long career that's, once you start going over a few years and you're trying to be competitive, it's almost constant innovation, I think. And that, in terms of your physiology and training and keeping up with it and trying to progress the changes around you as well. That might be tactical, it might be technical, it might be in terms of aerodynamics or whatever. And that's definitely part of it, and something that, I enjoy.
I think there's so much wisdom in that, in the sense that you're moving you've got a cog here that's about, say, for example, the climate around you, the people around you, the training that you can do, your age, the time of the season, all of these things that move constantly, that mean that making a decision on a given day is actually relatively complicated. I don't want to make it complicated, but you've got so many things to weigh up. I think that certainly many performers that I've worked with over the years, there's a sweet spot early in their career when they're really lapping up the ideas. I've got some support. I've got a physio, fantastic. I've got a biomechanist. I've got someone looking after my equipment, and they lap it up, and then they start to win, and then there's a slight shift in actually I just want to do what I did before, because of that certainty that's attached to it. That process gave me the win, and then it might be a bit harsh, but almost closed-mindedness increases a bit as you get further up. It sounds as though you've been able to kind of break that mold by asking these questions of yourself about what might be possible.
Yeah, possibly. I think a key facet to that is, fortunately, and I think part of it was me and part of it was to do with the great kind of people I had around me in my early years in sport, was that those decisions were always kind of down to me. And that doesn't work for everyone, but for me, it was always really important that I stood on the start line, and those decisions, and it might be a super complex decision, really specialist thing on an injury where I'd seen a few different doctors, or it might be something about going on a training camp, but whatever that decision was, I could have as much input as I wanted from different sources, but I would make that decision. And that was always a really important kind of facet of everything I've done. So if you start from that point, I think you start with a relatively open mind, and you start from a point of not always more information, but more good informed information is always a good thing. Don't get too stressed out by having too many angles if you can cope with that. But I don't think I ever have.
Interesting. Okay, so quite a lot of confidence coming from ownership on the start line in that sense.
Yeah, well, not necessarily. I think confidence is one thing, and I think that's important, but that kind of direct, almost feedback loop, like to really simplify it, I did a race, this went badly, is that linked to that decision or that decision? Right, what am I going to do about that decision? And this is what I'm going to do, ABC, which at that point obviously is that, learn more about this, talk to this person, act on it. And I think that I'm not saying that it was completely down to me, this went wrong or this went right and I made this decision. I think it's the feedback loop of, this is working or it isn't working. What am I going to do to make it work, or what I'm going to do to keep it working? And at that point, reaching out. And I think a lot of the time I thought that, if something wasn't working and I'm like, this isn't working, you're then telling someone else why it isn't working. They're trying to work out why their decision didn't work. And then there's kind of loads of interference in those kind of pathways. And I much prefer the direct. So kind of less about the confidence, more about kind of direct decision making. And that's something else I've always been really interested about. Decision making, the conviction of that, what that leads to in terms of performance, ways to make really good clinical decisions on the basis of the information you have at hand.
Can you give me an example of that? That sounds interesting.
Yeah, well, a really simple example, I guess, is a racing situation example. So you're in a race. Let's say there is a attack, going up the road in a simple, you're in a group of 40 people. There's 2 or 3 people going up the road. Do you cover that at the downside of losing energy, or do you go with it, or do you just sit and wait at the upside of other people are losing energy? Hopefully it comes back together. That's a decision you've got to make off insight because it's super quick. So you haven't really got time to consciously process it necessarily. And there's loads of information. There's like current information of who are those people up the road, what's the course like, what are the weather conditions like, what's the race been like so far, is it fast, is it slow, What's the danger? Can those people in front of me run? Can they not? All these things, and it's not special to triathlon. Obviously, that's every sport. You're making technical decisions, I thought my way of kind of really honing that ability was to constantly check it myself, effectively. So go in races and not formally do it, but think afterwards, did I do this right? Didn't I do it right? How do I do it best? And let's actively try things and experiment. I thought that was important for the reasons I guess I've tried to just articulate in terms of the direct feedback loop to me. But also I thought, and this is a kind of anecdotal kind of feeling I had ages ago, and I've actually seen some stuff about it recently, but the strength of those learning processes of actually doing it in high pressure situations. So I thought we're going to be much stronger than watching it on a video or learning in a classroom or being told it by someone who'd never even been in that situation. That was kind of the basis behind it. And I kind of had this idea of to make good decisions, you've got a library kind of information, but to access that library, you need the information. I think most people probably have the information somewhere, but you need to access relevant information, and you need to be able to access it fast. And for that to be the case, that information has to be kind of significant. And I think the significance comes from the kind of strength of the situation that you've learned it in. And that was kind of my ability of experimenting in racing to do it effectively. I think that then we're kind of onto this really interesting juxtaposition of how do you still kind of feel the ability to experiment in races and not get caught up in the pressure of the situation. And that was something else that I kind of thought quite a lot about and tried to keep active. I'm prepared to risk take here for the greater good and interest, rather than actually sit on my laurels and be really cautious about it. There was times to be cautious, but times to use it as an experience as well.
There's so much in there. I could go in so many different tangents, but that sense of I'm not going to be able to draw on the learning or the idea or the conclusion unless I've reinforced it with trialing it out under those pressure situations. That's what I'm hearing. And I think it's easy for a lot of performers and coaches to think we'll just prepare, we'll just try and make it easy and comfortable, and then we'll pop up and it will be okay, as opposed to that element of performance needs stress testing in the same way that an engineer would stress test a piece of material, for example. We need to test that works under that level of pressure. So to loop back to the sub-7, so an Ironman is not something you can do that often in terms of trialing and testing. Are you breaking the components down? How are you approaching it?
So my I want to race short distance this year. Hopefully things will go well. I'll be able to race short distance well, qualify for Olympics, race at the Olympic Games, and that will be the last basically Olympic distance short race I'll do. Retire from it at that point, and then I'll be completely focusing on Ironman and long distance. I think kind of firstly, 80 to 90% of the training, I think it's fairly similar. You're basically training to be an endurance athlete. You're training for a good aerobic capacity. You're training your top end VO2 max to have a good spread. I think for Ironman, there's a couple of, from a physiological point of view, I think there's an efficiency at pace thing that's a bit different. So actually, if I'm going to pedal at X watts, just being really smooth at that wattage, obviously that's going to reduce the physiological load over a period of time. If I'm trying to do 300 watts, if I can ride at 300 watts, it's over 4 hours. That's significantly less physiological stress than actually riding at 310 for a bit and 290 for a bit. That's quite specific, but so that actual pacing thing is quite a difficult thing to do.
Can I just pick up on that? So reducing the kind of in the technical term, stochastic aspect. So you're reducing the variability, trying to keep it close.
Yeah. We all know that if you want to go out and run a 5-minute mile, it's kind of easier running a 5-minute mile than it is running half of it at 4:30 and half of it at 5:30. So basically that, and over 4 years, but kind of really honing in on that pace, I think it is important. I think the other physiological aspect of it is your kind of metabolic profile, and you're effectively trying to shift your metabolic profile to be able to be a little bit more fat efficient. That's super in vogue at the moment, and my experience is you can definitely go too far, but it just, you're trying to do an Ironman. It's very another alluring idea that the more fat you can burn at a specific wattage, the better it is, because the less carbohydrate you're going to have to take in and the less stomach issues. We all know you can take a maximum amount of carbohydrate in an hour, so you can't rely on it too much. So the metabolic thing, I think, is important. And then you've got the technical aspects around it. So aerodynamics on the bike really is the main technical aspects. A reduction in your CDA, because your air resistance is a squared relationship to speed, is evidently very significant. So that's important. And we all think we all like to have fancy bikes and stuff, but the body is, I think, 85 to 90% of the aerodynamic drag on your bike. So it's your position and your suit and helmet that are really important. So optimizing that, and that's most of it. When I kind of actually look at the sub-7, if you break it down like very simple, if we go back to our probably shouldn't say a cigarette packet, but you know what I mean.
You mentioned 51 kilometers an hour for a corner, and I on my little cigarette packet here, I haven't got a cigarette packet. My notes. I'm going. Oh, that's aiming for about what, 330, 340. So can you? I don't know if I've got that right or not, but can you break down the kind of idea that you're going for?
Well, swim 45 minutes. You haven't got a lot to play with there, and I think once you start going a lot faster than 45 minutes, you're being kind of, again, exponentially inefficient. For me, I kind of know what that pace is physiologically. Once you're going above, or actually close and above the threshold, obviously that's not efficient. For every increase of 1 or 2 seconds per 100, you're really burning through oxygen and carbohydrate. You've got, I think, about 2:30 for a really fast marathon, and that's probably on the optimistic side. So you're at 3:15 there, and then that leaves you with 3:45. So that's where 51 point something kilometers an hour comes from, in that range, with a bit of transition time in there. I think you want, there is ways of making a swim a bit faster, and I think the swim will be fast from technology in the wetsuits. One of the things that I've kind of come across with it is that actually, what do you want to do to this to still make it legitimate? For example, with the swim, you can swim down a river and do it in 25 minutes. And on the bike, you can very easily put in the dynamics, and you could draft behind a articulated truck for the whole thing and do it in 3 hours. But obviously that's not very interesting. In a similar way, if you stick to Ironman rules, you're not going to do it in under 7 hours. So it's finding, part of the challenge is finding the sweet spot where 6 hours 59 is still really challenging and really interesting and really legitimate at the same time. And that is going to involve stuff that isn't within the rules. So that's like thicker wetsuits, drafting on the bike, maybe one-way courses, stuff like that. So if we go on 3 hours 45 for the bike here, you're looking at those kind of speeds. You want to save a few more minutes, so you want really 3 hours 40. It works out that even at higher, really, to hold that kind of speed on the front, even with really good conditions, really good rolling resistant conditions, really low air resistance, and you're still at the kind of higher end of wattage of what really good triathletes are going to do for maybe an hour or so, and what top end cyclists are going to do for maybe a little bit longer than that. So you're effectively in a team time trial kind of format there of doing those kind of speeds, and then it's deciding how many people are they coming in or out, and I think that's going to depend on actually the location. The location's never going to be perfect. You want to find a nice flat bit of water that's right next to a bit of road that's got really good low resistant tarmac on it with good weather conditions, and right next to a run you can run there's going to be flat, and then obviously you want the right weather conditions. You want it to be relatively warmer and more humid on the bike to decrease your air resistance, and you want it to be cool once you're running so you've not got that physiological pressure, and so you're trying to kind of combine all these factors, and that's why it's so interesting.
Yeah, wow. Okay, so you're looking for a change of weather or a strange topography that can cause that for you. But so the conclusion is it's not going to be in Yorkshire by the sounds of it.
Yeah, I can definitely conclude it. Yeah, we don't have the air resistance conditions, the rolling resistance conditions. Yeah, I think the easy thing to do there, isn't it, is the time of day you're riding afternoon and running when it gets dark.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Of course. And so how far off do you think you are in terms of the physical changes that you might need to adapt to, and the gain that you might need to achieve?
I think physically, for me, I try to be the place in training where I'm kind of 3 months off. Anything once you're kind of relatively fit, within kind of 2 to 3 months of training, you're not going to get that much better at anything else. Once you've got a very high base. So like from where I am now, I'd like to think, touch wood and everything went well, I could be in the best position to race at my best position to race an Olympic distance race, or my best position to race an Ironman distance race, or anything in between. So yeah, I mean, that's the kind of time frame. It's the technical things around it, a bit more of the project, but which we're kind of kicking off, having a suit that's really aerodynamic, having a wetsuit that's fast, really honing in on that bike position. I'm sure, the bike position effectively is the more difficult, more uncomfortable the position, the more aerodynamic it is. So can you train yourself to hold that better and still be able to produce the power, and then still be able to get off and run afterwards or not, and finding that kind of trade-off.
And how's that been going so far? That the going from riding on the tops effectively to be in a tuck position. How have you found the transition? And also part of that is, have you been able to find a happy medium that you can work with?
Yeah, I mean, like anything, you're always trying to kind of make that happy medium a bit better. So yeah, I mean, I actually transitioned onto a new bike. The new Scott Plasma came out last year, and I transitioned to make my position a bit more aerodynamic onto that. I'm actually not 100% convinced it's worked for me. It's just a classic sporting trade-off, and everyone knows that. And the only thing you can do is be really informed by the science, in that this is the reduction in your CDA by moving from here to here, and you have to go and work out, well, that has this impact of me being able to produce the power, me being in this position, me then running afterwards. So yeah, and I think over, especially Ironman distance, it's a long time. It's 4 hours to be in that position, and then you're getting off and running afterwards. So yeah, that's a constant thing, and I think probably as the body changes a little bit as well, it's kind of optimizing it for the state your body's in at that time.
And how much of a team effort is this? And I know there's a few other people involved. Lucy, Charles Barkley, for example. How much of a project is it that you're all pulling in the same direction?
It's a fascinating project. One of the brilliant things about the sub-7 is it really seems to have ignited kind of interest in different people actually, and that's been brilliant. And it is if you think it's a project that you're maximizing physiology, you're maximizing nutrition, you're maximizing aerodynamics, you're maximizing conditions, and working with different people across that. So I'm really fortunate to have a great team to maximize all those things. Even to the extent, obviously, doing the aerodynamic stuff and I've got a model of me made that we're testing suits on to have the most aerodynamic suit, so I don't have to be doing it, to actually producing a bar extension. So the tri-bars that go at the front to the best possible bars, and they're being done by Syncross, which is just a part of the bike brand I'm sponsored by. So that there's all these kind of moving parts, and that's fascinating.
Will you get to keep the dummy afterwards?
Didn't ask that. I'm not sure I want it. I don't need another one of me.
just in the garage, or make it into a coffee table or something. But when I looked into the company that's backing it, Phoenix Foundation, I was sort of expecting, because I didn't know much about the company, I was expecting it to be related to a big corporate as much as anything. But it was social welfare organisation, and you mentioned about kind of the ripple effects of let's try and do this to create the conversation. Have you got a broader, almost societal goal that you're trying to achieve with this?
Yeah, absolutely. From going right back almost 10 years now, Johnny and I realised we had a kind of an obligation, but also a great position to be able to inspire people to do sport, and obviously use triathlon to do that. Partly because we were getting invited into talk. I think every school in Yorkshire, probably the north of England, and so we were thinking, what's the way to do this? We kind of really feel like we've got responsibility, and that's why we started the foundation. And that's been brilliant. And so, kind of over the years, look for partners that have a similar goal on that front, and the Phoenix Foundation, that's backed by a kind of Polish backer, and he's really got these goals as well. So that's something really exciting, and we're going to start rolling out more of our charity events with them, hopefully from 2022, and telling this story as well of actually, the story of sub-7 hopefully is actually so much more than activity. I've always used the example of triathlon's fantastic because our foundation delivers triathlon days for 1,000 kids at the time. We did over 10 last year, so getting tens of thousands of kids through to do triathlon, and really it's about having that opportunity. My whole belief is about giving people opportunity. So if young Jimmy comes along and he liked running, actually he's then inspired, and we can signpost him to go and do some more running or more swimming or more triathlon. I kind of wanted the sub-7 project to be partly about that, partly about, kind of as cliche as it sounds, showing people that really ridiculously impossible things can be possible, and the interest around that, and partly by democratizing, I guess, and making interesting and simplifying and relevant kind of some of the science and technology that goes into these things. I was lucky, had a great upbringing, went to a great school, really kind of had a passion for academics, but I also saw that actually, friends that I rode bikes with, they would have been fascinated in the science, I guess, of aerodynamics and it is simple physics, aerodynamics and telling that story, and that's been another real interest of mine. So that's kind of where I would like to get with it, and we're aiming for that.
Oh, fantastic! And do you have many thoughts, kind of post competition? And I mean, I don't mean you got to stop. Several athletes still want to compete and still train, but that top end of competition, you said about the Olympics this year, hopefully, fingers crossed, and then further Ironman and sub-7 and so on. Do you have thoughts about what after your sporting, hang up your aero suit? I don't know what the right phrase is for triathlon. Hang up your. Well, it's a full kit list, isn't there?
Yeah. Well, I think firstly, I'm always going to be training and being competitive at something. One of the things about having a career in elite sport is there's loads of things that I haven't been able to do that I'd love to be able to do, like adventure challenges races, crazy things like Ultra Tour of Mont Blanc and Marathon des Sables, and particular bike races here and there, and extreme triathlons like the Norseman. So all those kind of things. So I've got a very long bucket list of those kind of things to do. And
James sounds a bit James Cracknell like there.
Maybe, yeah. So that, and then a portfolio of other things that interest me. One of the actual, I guess, really the good things to come out of the last year is it's been giving me the time and the kind of the space to think and work out what those things are. And I'm lucky to be in a position. And I also think it's been really important for me to have an idea of what those are. So it's going to be hopefully 4 or 5 years. But if it was tomorrow, I wouldn't be down the pub. Well, not that we could go to the pub these days, but I wouldn't be down the pub, with nothing to do. I've got a kind of portfolio of interesting, kind of relevant and inspiring things to do. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, look, it's been fascinating talking to you, hearing about the sub-7 project, the book coming out, but also just hearing a little bit about how you approach it, your mindset, but also the meticulous approach. You've as much schooled me on some of the aspects there. So impressive. How can people follow the event? Because we don't know when it's going to happen, but assuming that it needs to, a number of things need to combine for this to happen. Not only the readiness of the project, but the date, it might not be set until the last minute, I presume. But how can people stay engaged?
Yeah, well, I'm very confident it's going to happen. When and where is anyone's guess. I think basically it's spring next year, so 2022. That kind of probably between March and May, depending on the location that we decide on. You can stay up to date with it by following me on Twitter and Instagram. And like I said, my focus will, in theory, if everything goes well, will really kind of turn to it from the back end of this year. So after that, obviously, my preparation will be ramping up, and I'll be really hoping to be able to tell the story of what that looks like as well.
Amazing. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Alistair.